Hello everyone, this is Lego here with a bit of a mistake. I uploaded the video yesterday and turns out it didn't have sound because I deleted it by accident. So this is a re-upload where I go through everything I did in that video but with sound. So apologize for that. This is the tutorial I am making on Aurora effects. You can see an example right here in the thumbnail, and let's just get right into it. So the reason I'm making this tutorial is I needed an effect like this. I needed an effect where I could apply something swirly and like a northern lights effect on something that was a bit more complex than just from point A to point B. So something like this was a bit hard to figure out. Um, there is an existing effect made by Iron Echo Design. I'll have a link to that in the description, but it's we'll get back to how that works. But it's not something that can be applied in this manner. So even though there's a very good tutorial on that, it doesn't cover the effect that I needed for a recent project I made. And so whenever I can't find any tutorials on something I need, I tend to make them myself after I figure out what I want to do. So this is that tutorial. Without further ado, this is the process that I'm going to get you through right now. This is my little recipe for how I do the effects that I'm about to show you, and I'll go through them one by one, but real quick, it's all about markers. So to start off with, let's talk about markers for a second. I've got a couple of examples over here, and I'm just going to redo those because, well, there was no sound. So first off, let's go about, this is a path, this is a stroke, it is a path, which means it has a couple of nodes. If I go to the node tool, you'll see that there is, let me just add a couple more. We have the start node and the end node, and then we have nodes in between, right? And all strokes and objects have these nodes. If I go to my fill and stroke menu and the stroke style, you'll see three drop downs for the markers. This is the start marker, this is the middle markers, and this is the end marker. So to demonstrate, let me just open up this menu, and you'll see there's a lot of different preset simple icons that I can put on as the start marker. Now let me just put something like, I don't know, that arrow. And you'll see it appears over the node. If I go to my end node, I can do the same thing. There's a bunch of presets. I can just put, say, this one, and it'll put it on the node. And one thing quickly to note here is that if I change the orientation of the path, the node changes with it. So it's dependent on the path direction. That's the default behavior. And if I look at any of the middle ones, that's the center section there. So if I open this up and apply, say, a square, it'll be put on all the middle nodes. If I add more nodes, it'll just put a marker on those as well. So that's the basic behavior of markers. You just put some icons on the nodes that are there. Start and end, pretty self-explanatory. If I take a closed path, like a circle, right now it's a circle or an ellipse, so it has these handles. But if I turn this into a object to path, so this becomes an object, you'll see we have four nodes here for the four quadrants. And what is the end and what's the first and last node, you might ask? It's a bit curious with the closed curves. If I take the first marker and I do, say, this, it'll appear there. And if I take the end marker and put, let's say, something like this on, well, it also appears on that node. So for closed strokes, closed paths, the end node and the start node is actually the same node. So this is the only case that I know of where one single node actually contains and can contain two different markers at once. So that's a bit curious, but that's just how it is. The other nodes here, they are the middle nodes. So if I do something like that, ta-da, they behave as the middle nodes. But the start and end node for a closed path is the same node, which is a bit curious, but you can do some pretty cool things with that if you want to. Now, it doesn't have to be any of the preset icons. You can see I made an ugly little thing there to demonstrate, and I can do that again. I'll just make something like this. Let's say that this was something I made, and I wanted this to be a marker as well. I can just take a duplicate, because whenever you turn something into a marker, it'll disappear. Take this, I can select it, go to object, and then under the object menu you have object to marker. Boom, it disappears, it's now a marker. If I go back to this object and change the settings here, you can see there is now this ugly green thingy placed right here. And I'll just click on it, and it looks way too big right now. And that's because it's scaled relative to the thing. So if I go down here to the menu here, I can scale this down maybe 10, and it looks a bit better. You'll see there's some other controls here. I'm going to get back to those in a second. But for now, just notice that I can make my own markers and place them wherever I like. Okay, so that's pretty central to this idea. So having talked about markers, we are going to make a marker using some specific dimensions, shall we say, and then I'm going to adjust it. And I think it's best if we just look at an example. This is the marker I made for the thumbnail. It's just a thin stroke, and then I applied a gradient to it, a linear gradient. So it's got a pretty opaque end line there, but the rest of it is pretty transparent. And then I just put a taper effect on, so it tapers off into a thin tail on both ends. So this is the marker object that I have. And if I take a piece of text like this, I can have my text, make a bitmap copy of that, and then I can centralize trace it so that this text object, which you can't apply because there's no nodes here, this is a text object. So I can't apply any nodes to it. There's no nodes, there's no markers. If I make a bitmap copy of it, I can then centerline trace it, and this becomes a stroke, which is pretty central to this idea. I need a stroke. So with this object in mind, I can just add a bunch of nodes, apply the marker, and then I get something like this. And I can then further mess it about a little bit by randomizing the nodes a little bit, by jittering them. You can tell maybe the O here is a little bit different, it's a little more random down here, and I think it looks a bit better that way. So this is the end goal, right? I'm going to go through the whole process in a moment, but I just want to show one more example. If I just turn this on, ta-da, because it doesn't have to be text, obviously. Most of you guys, if you want to do this, will probably have some sort of path already. Although text looks pretty cool, and it's a bit of a roundabout way of doing it, but it can of course work for regular paths as well. So here I've made a quick Celtic knot thingy by just using a triangle as a reference and placing 3 circles on it. Then I add the Celtic knot effect, which just removes these sections in a manner that works out. And this is, even though this is paths, this is a live path effect that is applied, which means that the nodes are technically still there. It's still, technically speaking, a complete circle. It's not finalized. So I did the same thing I did earlier. I made a bitmap copy and then centerline traced this to get the strokes that actually have the endpoints so that I don't get anything in between. Now, this whole bitmap copy centerline tracing thing, I'll go over it in a second. It'll make sense why I do this. But for now, I've got my path, I've got my nodes. It's just a matter of adding a bunch of more nodes, extra markers, and at this point, you might be happy with this, but it still looks a bit too neat, too smooth, and I therefore added a bit of a jitter to give it that more bit of a randomized feel, a bit more organic, if you will. But you could choose to absolutely stop there if you want, if this looks good to you. But this is how you can apply it on objects that aren't text as well. It's the same procedure basically. You just use whatever you have until you get a bunch of strokes, then apply a bunch of markers, and there you go. So having said that and having shown that, let's actually go through the process from the beginning, because these was pre-made, right? But let me actually just do it right here with you. This was the earlier example I did without sound. I'll just do that again. So first off, let's start off by making a text. I'll just be writing glitch here because I have an effect in mind. Make that bigger. And this is a text object, right? There's no nodes for me to apply markers to. So before I do anything else, I need to take a bitmap copy of this. Now, whenever you have an object selected and it's a vector object, you can take right click and you can go to your mark it up, select it, then go to edit, and then you have make a bitmap copy. Now it just puts it on top. So if I take this down, this you can see it's recognized as an image. So this is a regular rasterized photo, if you will, a PNG photo of this path up here. And with this, I can use the trace tool in Inkscape by right-clicking on it and go to Trace Bitmap. And it brings up the usual menu of tracing images in black and white and multicolor and stuff like that. What we're interested in this time is the mode that's called centerline tracing. And what this does is, if I just apply this, it puts it on top again. But if I drag this down, what you've gotten here is actually one centerline stroke that fits in whatever shape it was tracing. So this is a bunch of strokes applied in such a way that it tends to try and follow the centerline of whatever object it tried to trace, which is perfect for text because this means this is just a bunch of strokes. So now I can apply my my markers. Now, if I try to just select this object, I can go to my stroke menu and we will choose the center nodes, right? The center right nodes. And even though you can't see it, because this object, this marker is very, very transparent. It's very, very faint and it's very big. This means that in the menu, it's pretty much transparent. You can't really see it. So I know for a fact that when I go to this menu over here and find this marker, I know for a fact it's this marker right here. You can't see it, but I know it's there. So if I just apply it like that, you'll see it applied it. Now, if I just move this down a bit so we can get a better look, it's pretty big, right? And that's because this is a marker, and markers scale relative to the thickness of the stroke width. Now, what do I mean by that? The width of this object, the stroke here, is 1. If I turn this down to, say, 0.5, the overall scale and size of the marker changes with it. And this is because of this setting right here, which I, by default, always have turned off. But this means that I can change the overall scale relative to the text by changing the thickness. If I don't want that, if I want to change the size of the marker independently of the thickness of the stroke, then I just go to this menu over here and I use the scaling here. So I can take this down without changing the thickness of the stroke. Now I'm just going to undo that. There we go. And right now it's not very clear. There's just a bunch of those, but they're not really organized. So what I'm going to do is going to take my node tool and I'm going to mark up all the nodes, and then I'm just going to add some nodes with this tool right here. And you can see as I add more and more nodes, it'll be more and more intense depending on how many nodes I added to the different sections. So a section like this with a bunch of nodes very tightly together, it'll be more clearly shown relative to something like this where there's not a lot of nodes. And so it's going to be more sparse. I can further control this by just selecting some elements by holding shift and just using my mouse to select a bunch of nodes by dragging and clicking, and then these select inferior areas I can increase the amount of nodes also to get into a bit more of a uniform density, if I will, by just adding some extra nodes wherever there are none. So this section right here, for example, get some more nodes in there. There we go. And I could go through and do all that. So this is pretty uniform right now. And you can tell, you can almost see this as a piece of text, right? If I just change the stroke color to yellow as well, it's not too bad, right? But at the same time, it's not really an effect that really looks good on this object. So frankly, let's try something different. If I take this down here again, make a copy, and I just remove the marker by going to none, we are back to our text, right? And let me instead just make a little square, maybe like something like maybe this color, and then just a little bit of a gradient, tiny bit of gradient. I want a lot of transparency because when you stack these on top of each other, you need a lot of transparency, otherwise it's going to be completely opaque and it's going to look bad. So I need transparency on all stops. I just want to figure out what color I'm going to use. So maybe something, maybe something like that. Maybe this is my object. So I'm just going to make a duplicate of this so I don't lose it. And then I'm going to mark it up, and then I'm going to go to object, object to marker. So let's try and apply this. I'm going to go to my strokes menu, choose my middle marker, and then I can just see it right there. It's right there. It's not totally transparent, it's right there. So I'm just gonna mark this up, and then right now it looks really weird because of the fact that the markers are relative to the path it's on, right? That's what I looked over here. This is the bottom edge, right? And it goes towards the center because of the way the node is oriented, the way the path goes. So these are all relative to the path. And so it is with this marker I just made over here. But we don't really want that because it looks really weird. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the menu here and look at the other objects down here. Now we have the orientation right here. And instead of orienting along the path, we can set an angle for all of them. And that angle is 0 right now, which looks better for this purpose, but it's still too big. So I need to do the scale. I'm not going to adjust the stroke, I'm just going to adjust the scale right here, say maybe 10. And that looks a little better, but it's still too big. So instead of doing that, let me unlink those so I can change the height independently. Something like this. Yeah, that looks good. And maybe 8. Something like that. Yeah, that looks better. So offset, we don't really want an offset. It's pretty nicely placed where it is. So with that done, let me just do one more thing because right now it looks too uniform. So I'm just going to go to my nodes tool. I'm going to select all the nodes. I'm going to go to my extensions and then modify path and then jitter nodes. And what I'm going to do here, I'm going to randomize them mostly in the horizontal direction. So maybe randomize 2 for the X and 0.2 for the Y. How does that look? That's a bit too much. 0.8 maybe, and 0.1. Yeah, I mean, let's try that. And if I just get rid of the stroke, the yellow stroke, by getting rid of that, you can see how this might be a sort of attempt at a glitch effect. If I want to duplicate this, I can duplicate it, maybe put it off to the side a bit. Nah, doesn't really look good. No, just get rid of that. But this is another example of how you could apply a marker effect to get some sort of effect that you can't get just using regular live path effects. I made an early attempt here where it's pretty wild, a bit too much, frankly. I think what I did there was I took this and then after the fact I just applied a filter by going to the blur and just making a vertical blur. Don't want that, we want a horizontal blur, I think, of 2.0 maybe? No, that's a bit too much. 1.5, 0.2. No, it doesn't really look good. I prefer it with no, because it already looks like it's blurry just by how I made the gradient. So you can play around with that, but that's the basic gist, right? Take a piece of text and make a bitmap copy, center trace it, put on your strokes, right? That's how I did the examples here. There is one other way of doing it, and that is if you actually have a solid area you need to fill out. So this is all made with strokes, and that's the application I needed. But if you have, for some reason, a filled out piece of text or a piece of some object that you need to fill out with a stroke, sort of like I did here, there is another tool for that, even though it's not as controllable. So I'm just going to make a piece of text here just to showcase that. So let me just write demo, make this real nice and big. I'm going to make this bold actually, just so I have some more area to work with, something like this. And let's say you don't want centerline tracing, you don't want a single stroke to like trace after. You want an actual filled area with stuff. So the best way I found to do this, even though it's not precise, is to actually use the spray tool. So let's grab another. No, actually let's just remake that one. I can remake this real quick. So I'm going to take the pencil tool, freehand, a lot of smoothing. I'm gonna make something that looks like this, sort of, and we can make this a bit bigger. Just say 1, there we go. And then I'm going to apply a gradient on the stroke, and I'm just going to use a linear gradient, and I'm going to cheat a bit and steal one of the ones I've done previously. But I'm just going to take the opaque end at the bottom and the transparent edge on the other end, and actually let me just adjust that a bit. I don't want a lot of opaque material. I just want the edge there, just a tip, really, because that is the point that is going to be visible. Something like this, maybe. So let's take this and let's make this into a marker. I'm just going to select it and then go to Object, No, actually, no. Never mind. This is not going to be based on markers, so I'm actually just going to take this object and use this as my base. So I select this, then I go to my spray tool, and I'm just going to use the clone tool because then I can control afterwards the spacing and the size and the colors and stuff. So the important thing here is this setting right here that says apply over transparent areas. We don't want that because the background here, anything that's not objects that I created is going to be transparent. So this way, when I start applying this, it will only apply it if it fits within the boundary of whatever object I have here. So the first thing I'm going to do real quick is I'm just going to make this into an actual path by going object to path like that. And then I'm going to ungroup it. And then I'm going to unionize the whole thing together. So this is one path now. Having done that, I can take my object. I'm going to start spraying. And let's see what happens. Now, as you can see there, it doesn't really look like anything recognizable. And that's okay for now. The reason it sprays like this is because it always takes the center point of the object. So I need to take these and I need to raise them up until the tip approximately fits within the area that I'm looking at. Now this still looks horrible. So I'm actually going to take this, get rid of it, and then I'm going to look at the tool set of the spray tool. Now you can see that the width is 10 and the scatter is 5. If I turn this down, something like this, and I try the same thing, let's see what happens. Now you can see I have some rotation and some scale, so they're not totally they're not totally alike, all of them. But it does mean that we have a lot of variation still. And you can already tell there, just by looking at the yellow tips, it's still just one big mess. This is not recognizable as anything, so I'm going to delete this. And this is what I mean by it's not precise. In this example, I mean, maybe you can tell it's a T, but probably not. Let me try one last thing. If we turn rotation and scale off, and we turn this ray down as well, and at that point I'm also going to make this object bigger, just to sort of see if I can make that better. Okay, let's try this. So take the spray tool and then there we go. Actually, it might work better if I do it from below because they just end up obscuring each other. Let me just do this and then start from below. And then just take it nice and easy. Now this might be passable as an E, but as far as text goes, I really prefer to using the markers. But you can fill out areas with the same sort of effect by using the spray tool, because one of the things that it does right is that it does not apply to transparent areas. So if I go like this, I can't spray it onto, what is, oh, I forgot to choose. There we go. Select. There we go. I can't spray onto anything that's not an object. So I can do all this, but it'll never ever put anything out here. So in actuality, this effect would be better probably if you took the opacity way down. It's still way too opaque right now, because it just ends up being red all around. But the short end of the stick is that this is what I wanted to show, and this is just an alternate method that I toyed around with, but it didn't end up working for what I did. So this is pretty much what I want to show you. As a last thing before I end this, real quick about the tutorial made by Iron Echo Design. The reason I'm not using it, I just wanted to point out that it relies on some simpler geometry here. So if I take these and I combine those together, I'm just really quickly going to show what the other tutorial is about. If I just go and use my subpath, then I just essentially I do this with a bit of thinner. Let's make this. So there I just have a bunch of lines, right? And then I can use the path effect to give it some, oh, that's a bit much. Something like this, right? And then you can use that as an northern lights effect, and that works fine whenever you have some simple geometry that you need to place these in between. But when it comes to more complex closed curves like this, or more complex objects with a lot of twists and turns, this path right here would never work with this method. So it has its uses, certainly, but it's not going to give you that northern light effects or any complex effects like this once you have something that's more complicated than just a straight line or some wavy lines. And if you want to vary this, I don't know if you could tell, but this effect right here is not the same as this effect right here. And that's because this marker actually shares its properties with everything else. What do I mean by that? I mean that under the marker, over on this side here, you have the scale and you have the rotation and stuff. This is shared between all markers that use this symbol, this particular effect. So if I change the angle here to -10, well, look what happens over there. It also changed. And all this over here also changed because it all shares the same marker. The way to go about getting different markers on the same object is actually by not having the same object. Instead, what you want to do is, if you take this as an example, you'll take this, duplicate it, and then you'll need to apply a different marker, like say this. And then you can play around. Please? No? There we go. And then you can change the direction of the duplicate. So you actually have two objects on top of each other and then have different markers applied. They can be identical, but they have to be different. So I can take a duplicate of, say, this marker, take a duplicate of this, make a new marker, and then give that a different orientation. And then I could play around with different orientations without affecting the existing ones. So that's the way to go about that. It looks a bit much in this manner, but I guess that could be what you're after. Maybe change the colors a bit, maybe change the scale. You can do a lot of that. But I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to say in the original video and in this redo as well. The basic steps, as I said, is just to make a thin marker stroke very transparent, and then just make up the length and colors, tapering, and everything you want about the marker. It takes a few tries. I did some off-camera work before I made the project where I used this to just see what worked and what doesn't. And then you just adjust your angle, thickness, and offset to match what you need. And you can take the original object and just completely make it disappear if the markers are enough to showcase the actual shape. Then you probably don't need the stroke itself, or you can just make it blurry. That also works too. And the number of nodes, as I wrote here, don't use thousands and thousands of nodes. Instead, just duplicate the object and make another set of jittery nodes to make more copies of itself. It's way faster and less intense than just making one object with thousands of nodes. There's no need for it, frankly. But that's probably what I wanted to say with this, so I'll just end it here. Bye.